Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor. Madam Secretary, could you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Carlton. Assemblywoman Considine.
Present.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Here.
Assemblywoman Duran.
Here.
Assemblyman Flores.
Present.
Assemblyman Frierson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Present.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Here. Here.
Assemblywoman Tolles. Chair Howdigi.
Here. And thank you. And please mark Assemblywoman Carlton or Vice Chair Carlton present when she arrives. Thank you, members. Welcome to round 2 of Commerce and Labor for today. I'm going to go through our normal housekeeping before we get started on our bill hearings. I want to remind everyone that exhibits, testimony, and amendments must be submitted by noon on the business day prior to the committee meeting. Persons wishing to testify, attend the meeting virtually, must pre-register online on the legislature's website. The public is strongly encouraged to submit written testimony in advance of the meeting by emailing the committee manager for Commerce and Labor. Remember, Zoom chat is reserved for committee business only. Members, please remember to keep your camera on at all times it will help us ensure that we have a quorum unless you are stepping away for non-committee related business. Members and presenters, please remember to stay muted at all times unless you are going to speak. Unmute yourself and then promptly mute yourself right after. We have a short agenda for this evening's Commerce and Labor meeting. We have 2 bills on our agenda, Assembly Bill 439 and Assembly Bill 438. For those watching and listening over the internet, and for those here, I want to let you know that we will be taking the items out of order and starting with Assembly Bill 438. With that, members, let's go ahead and get started with our agenda. So the first bill on our agenda today is going to be Assembly Bill 438. So I will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 438, which revises provisions relating, I'm going to open the hearing on Assembly Bill 439. Which revises provisions relating to occupational licensing. We have Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod with us this evening to present Assembly Bill 439.
Thank you, Chair Howdigi and members of the committee. I just received a notice that my internet is unstable, so I hope that you can hear me okay. So happy to be here. For the record, I am Shannon Bilbray Axelrod, representing Assembly District 34 in Clark County. During the interim, I was honored to serve as Vice Chair of the Legislative Committee on Senior Citizens, Veterans, and Adults with Special Needs. I'm here to present Assembly Bill 439, which seeks to revise provisions relating to occupations and professional licensing for active members and veterans of the United States Armed Forces, as well as their spouses or surviving spouses. Joining me is Kelly Mae Douglas, Pacific Southwest Regional Liaison, Defense State Liaison Office of the United States Department of Defense, and Cesar Maguiro, Committee Policy Analyst for the Legislative Committee on Senior Citizens, Veterans, and Adults with Special Needs during the 2019-2020 interim. This past summer, the Legislative Committee on Senior Citizens, Veterans, and Adults with Special Needs heard testimony from 2 military spouses serving in Nevada. These spouses are professionals in their own industry and shared their stories, experiences, and employment challenges of spouses of those who serve. The committee learned that more than 1/3 of military spouses require some sort of licensure for their careers, and an estimated 62% of military spouses report experiencing licensure challenges. One of the main reasons a member of the U.S. Armed Forces leaves military service is their spouse's inability to work. In addition, as a result of frequent moves associated with military life, military spouses earn significantly less when they work than their civilian counterparts. However, they're often more formally educated than their civilian colleagues. According to a survey by Blue Star Families, 30% of military spouses are unemployed and 56% are underemployed. Unfortunately, our military spouses face two choices. One, face family separation if they choose to remain in the current state of unemployment. Or two, keep the family intact by moving and possibly incurring a job loss. I personally have known spouses who have made both of these tough decisions. Neither were easy. Chair Houdigy, at this time, I'd like to turn over the presentation to Ms. Douglas, who will further discuss the barriers to occupational licensing for military spouses. Then to Mr. Milagro, who will provide a quick summary of the bill.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Ms. Douglas, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, for your advocacy on this important issue. Good evening, Chair Houdigy, Vice Chair Carlton, and members of the committee. My name is Kelly May Douglas, for the record. I am the Pacific Southwest Regional Liaison with the Defense State Liaison Office, which is part of the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Our office's mission is solely to assist states in improving the quality of life for military service members and their families through state policy changes like this one. My region encompasses Nevada, California, Arizona, Utah, and Hawaii. I'm based in San Diego, but am actively campaigning my husband to relocate our headquarters to Nevada, but I'll let you know. Thank you for allowing me to provide comments regarding the policy change referenced within AB 439. Addressing licensure issues for the spouses of our military service members has been a priority for the department for several years and has been reconfirmed by First Lady Dr. Jill Biden through her renewed Joining Forces effort. Military spouses are disproportionately affected by state-specific licensure requirements that can cause delays and gaps in employment, with over 34% of the working population requiring state licensure to practice in their professions, and an annual cross-state relocation rate 10 times higher than their civilian counterparts. Subsequently, military spouses experience unemployment and underemployment at significantly higher rates than their civilian peers, which we could all imagine has likely been compounded by the pandemic. State policies that enhance existing licensure provisions for military spouses, such as the proposed change within AB 439, relieve one of the many stressors of frequent military moves by enabling spouses to move more quickly and transfer their license in order to obtain employment in the new state. These policies facilitate greater career sustainability for military spouses, improving their families' financial security and overall resilience. To date, 20 states have enacted provisions to meet our criteria for what we call enhanced military spouse licensure portability, and 21 states, including Nevada, currently have active legislation. If approved, AB 439, as introduced, would benefit military spouses by requiring that all boards under Title 54 provide an improved pathway for streamlined endorsement, expanding the current provision for temporary licenses to encompass all boards under Title 54 and to provide those temporary licenses immediately, and ensuring that all relevant licensure policies are easily accessible on agency websites. Additionally, this bill would provide the legislature and the public with valuable data on licensed professionals who are spouses of active duty military members. As reported by the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness to Governor Sisolak in February 2020, Nevada has made some progress in the area of licensure portability for the military community. However, current Nevada statute on the matter is somewhat vague, permissive, and does not include enough licensing boards to fully meet our criteria for licensure portability for our military spouses. In addition, we have found that military spouses lack access to existing provisions due to the absence of easily available information on many of the board's websites and applications. Additionally, in August of 2020, the Secretary of the Air Force released its first annual report on state licensure, rating Nevada as partially meeting their criteria for licensure, matching the DoD assessment. This issue continues to be of critical focus for the department moving forward. In fact, the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act requires that all military services develop criteria for assessing states' status of licensure portability or reciprocity, and to incorporate their findings into their future mission-basing decision-making processes. In addition to influencing basing decisions, some federal grants have begun to require applicants to address the extent to which they or their state or local government have provided support to military spouses, to include, to quote, ease military spouse unemployment and licensure for consideration. An example is the 2020 Defense Community Infrastructure pilot grants that were just awarded in September. The policy changes contained within AB 439 would meet most of the DoD and Air Force criteria for licensure portability, minus the interstate compacts, and bring Nevada to the forefront in terms of ensuring that our military families are not financially disadvantaged due to their service to our country. As far as a return on investment, the burden on boards to implement these policies is low. This policy would only affect slightly over 1,000 active duty military spouses at any given time, while the resulting positive impact would be exponentially greater for individual military families, the defense community, local communities, and the state. According to the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation, defense spending in Nevada for fiscal year 2019 was $3 billion. Thank you, Chair Housekeeping and the committee for bringing forth this vital policy issue for action. And thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the Department of Defense regarding the impact on the military community. I stand by to answer any questions that you might have.
And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Caesar to go over the sections of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, and thank you, Chair Howdigi and members of the committee. For the record, I am Cesar Melgarejo, and I was the committee policy analyst for the Legislative Committee on Senior Citizens, Veterans, and Adults with Special Needs. And as an employee of LCB, I will neither advocate nor oppose the provisions of this bill. I will review the substantive highlights of the bill as captured by the intent of the recommendation approved by the committee. As Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod and Ms. Kelly Mae Douglas addressed, Assembly Bill 439 aims to require occupational and professional licensing boards under Title 54 of the NRS and the Board of Applied Behavior Analysis to issue a license by endorsement to military affiliated persons. Sections 2 and 83 of the bill require a regulatory body to issue a license by endorsement to engage in an occupation or profession in this state to an applicant who holds a corresponding valid and unrestricted license to practice a profession in the District of Columbia or any state or territory of the United States and is an active member or the spouse of an active member of the U.S. Armed Forces or a veteran or the surviving spouse of a veteran. Section 2 prohibits a regulatory body from requiring such an applicant to undergo a fingerprint-based criminal background check unless required by interstate compact. Section 2 also requires a regulatory body to issue a provisional license immediately after submission of the application. The provisional license is valid until the application for the license by endorsement is approved or denied. Additionally, unless the applicant fails to meet the general licensing requirements concerning education, training, experience, certification, or registration from a professional organization, or achieving a passing score in an examination required for a specific occupation, Section 2 provides that the provisions of this section supersede any other provision of law prescribing specific requirements for the issuance of a license. Sections 2 and 80 prohibit a regulatory body from collecting not more than 1/2 of the fee set forth for an application and for initial issuance of a license. Section 3 prescribes the conditions under which a regulatory body has good cause to deny a license issued pursuant to Section 2 of the bill and Section 83. Sections 4 and 79 supplement existing provisions requiring a regulatory body to collect and submit a report containing certain information on the number of veteran applicants, to include collecting data regarding the number of military and veteran spouses that apply for, are issued, or denied a license. Section 4 also requires a regulatory body to post on their website information concerning the available options for obtaining a license as a service member, spouse of a service member, a veteran, or surviving spouse of a veteran. In addition, the bill replaces the term may with shall in various sections concerning issuing a license by endorsement to clarify that a regulatory body is required to issue an expedited license by endorsement to practice in certain health-related professions when the applicant meets the statutory requirements for the issuance of such a license. I would note that these sections would apply to all applicants for expedited license by endorsement and not just the military affiliated applicants. Finally, Section 87 repeals its existing provisions allowing regulatory bodies to issue an expedited license by endorsement to an applicant who is an active member or the spouse of an active member of the U.S. Armed Forces or a veteran or surviving spouse of a veteran. Chair Hautegy, those are the substantive provisions that were adopted by the interim committee, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Bilbrey-Axelrod, and your co-presenters for the presentation. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to committee members for questions, and we will start with Assembly Member Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this bill. I think it's a good bill. I just had a question. I'm not clear what one of the sections means, and I was hoping maybe you could just clarify it. And it's actually written in the Legislative Council's Digest, but it says that Section 84, 85, and 88 of this bill remove from Section 2 certain requirements necessary to comply with federal law concerning the collection of child support obligations from applicants for the issuance or renewal of occupational licenses if that federal law is repealed. So I didn't know, like, what does this actually mean and why it's in here?
Mr. Millargo, would you like to take that?
Yes, Assemblywoman. For the record, Cesar Melgarejo, Community Policy Analyst. Assemblywoman Considine, to answer your question, these provisions are replicated throughout NRS for most of the sections relating to occupational licensing, because there is a federal law that would allow a board to deny or repeal a license based on the applicant having owed back pay for child purposes. This is consistent throughout NRS, but I don't know the specifics of the federal law itself, but I do know that this language is consistent throughout NRS regarding professional and occupational licensing.
Thank you.
Okay, Assemblymember Dickman.
Thank you so much, Chair Hautegy. I don't really have a question. I would just like to say I think our occupational licensing has needed overhauling for a long time, but this is a fabulous place to start. I want to thank Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod for your work on the committee during the interim and what you've brought to us. It's really great. Thank you.
And I have Assemblymember O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to somewhat ditto Ms. Dickman's comment. Ms. Bilbray Axelrod and your staff, you did great work on this, and I greatly appreciate it. I'm a strong supporter of our veterans, particularly the spouses, who I think actually sometimes suffer in service more than the active DOD member does from having personal experience with it. But the one question I want to ask is there any way before next session that we could get a report on the numbers that this bill affected, or people that were able to come in and utilize this bill legislation? Would that be inappropriate to ask of you? My feeling is, and like I said, building upon Ms. Dickman, it would help us look at what more we can do in overhauling some of our occupational licenses, but additionally give more support to our veterans and spouses when they come into Nevada.
Mr. Mulligar, I
Yeah,
think that information would be good. I don't know if that's something we could amend in.
Yes, Assemblywoman, I can address that question. And Chair Howdy, through you to Assemblyman O'Neill. Yes.
Direct to the members.
Thank you, Chair. Assemblyman O'Neill, to answer your question, there is a report already required to be submitted to the legislature on a biannual basis. I believe it's required to be submitted on even numbered years. Yeah. And this bill would also incorporate that information. So if this bill were to pass this session, then depending on the boards being able to collect this information and being available by the next reporting period, you should have this report by next February of 2022.
That is excellent. Thank you. I didn't want to ask for an amendment because I didn't want anything to damage the movement of this bill going forward. So thank you that it's already there. I greatly appreciate it.
Assemblymember Tolles.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, for presenting this bill. I remember actually the first presentation that I heard at an event down in Las Vegas about the need for this in Nevada at an occupational licensing panel that I was part of, and I'm a huge supporter and so grateful that we have this before us. So my question specifically is on page 7, subsection 4, or section 4, subsection 3, and that's the regulatory body shall post on the internet website options for obtaining a license and so on and so forth. I wanted to know what other ways can we promote this to the veteran spouses of service members and surviving spouses. Are there other avenues by which we're going to be promoting this? Because I think it's such a good and necessary change.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Shannon Bilbray Axelrod, for the record. I would totally agree with you, and I think the important thing too is the folks who are moving into the state. So I think we'll work with my partner who actually testified today, Kelly Mae Douglas, and make sure that we get that information out to the folks who can really use this. And Ms. Douglas, if you wanted to expand on that, please go ahead.
Absolutely. So part of the department that my department falls under is Military, Community, and Family Policy. And under that department, we have spouse employment programs. And they wait for us to tell them when they have passed policies that benefit military spouses, and they immediately put it out. And we also work with Hiring Our Heroes. And so there's definitely a lot of different avenues to get this out once, and I'll be optimistic and say once this bill has passed. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Members, any other questions? Okay, I do have a couple of questions for you, Assemblymember Bilbray Axelrod, or for your presenters. And I might have missed it during the presentation, but how many other states have implemented this sort of policy?
I believe that Ms. Douglas did mention that, and I don't have the number at the top. It's many, but go ahead, Ms. Douglas.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod and Chair. 20 states right now have implemented the policies that we're seeking right now, and 21 states have legislation in going through right now.
And then I have another question, because I know we've repealed some sections of NRS, and one of the sections of NRS that we're repealing is 6225.510, which says which requires regulatory bodies to develop opportunities for reciprocity for qualified active members of the armed forces, member spouses, veterans, or veteran surviving spouses. So we already had this in statute, and we're repealing that. What was wrong with our current policy?
Mr. Milagro, I'll toss this one to you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod and Chair Howdigi. For the record, Cesar Melgarejo, Community Policy Analyst. Chair Howdigi, I think during the presentations, during the interim, it was reported that the current policies weren't being effective, and that was the major adoption for replacing the mays with shalls. And during the hearing, we also heard testimony that boards hadn't licensed anybody through those provisions on NRS 622.510. And I'm not sure if it was a specific deletion because of the drafting process, but what we heard during testimony during the interim was that some of the policies were not as effective as the legislator had intended to be.
And then, obviously we owe great debt to all of our service members and their spouses for all of the work they do. My concern is just coming more from protecting, Nevadans. And so I just want to make sure, because I know Nevada and a lot of our boards have really strict licensing criteria. Sometimes it's stricter. Most of the time, our licensing criteria is a lot stricter than what other states have. And so that's where a little of my concern comes in, just from having sat on this committee throughout the past sessions that I've served. And so one of the other areas of concern is just that immediate upon application issuance of a provisional license before they've even had time to do any investigatory work. So if someone is denied a license for reasons found during that investigation, we've allowed them to practice in our state with maybe having had some violations in their home state for not following, laws. And so what was the thought process between granting that immediate provisional license? And if they have to grant the license, I think within 15 days of receiving the application, why are we giving them that 15-day period to practice without having done any investigatory background work?
I don't know who wants to take that one. I believe in other states as well, but I recognize your question. So I don't know if Ms. Douglas, you want to speak to that?
Yes. So as far as the Department of Defense, we aren't asking for states to waive any sort of security background checks or investigative efforts to make sure that military spouses that might have some sort of disciplinary action on their record to work. So as far as we're concerned, we don't mind if that requirement is in there.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure because I just, with concerns like there's 15 days somebody can come in and be a licensed dentist, right? And maybe they have tons of complaints against them in their home state, and we won't know that for 2 weeks. And we've just little things I think might help make the bill better for our state. And then one other question I had is, why are we not requiring the fingerprints?
For the record, Cesar Magrejo, Community Policy Analyst, Chair Howdy. From the testimony received during the interim committee, it was reported that the time frame.
I do not know the answer.
Oh, the time frame for the fingerprint process to return and to be approved or denied, that was taking too long, and for the spouses to be able to immediately start working. But I would say, so the 15 business days, it requires the board to basically review the application within 15 business days and report to the applicant if there's any additional information that must be submitted. But the application must be approved or denied within 45 days.
And then so within 45 days, sometimes it takes more than 45 days for the fingerprints to come back.
Chair Howdy, for the record, says I'm a company policy analyst. That's what was reported in testimony, was that sometimes it just takes that's one of the hiccups that kind of takes a long time to be able to provide that license to this military spouse.
Thank you, Mr. Magarejo, and I appreciate you answering all the questions. Many of us didn't get the opportunity to serve on the interim committee, and so I think these were probably a lot of the same questions that came up during the interim committee, and so I think it's just good that we get them for the record. But I think, wouldn't there be a possibility of granting a provisional license until the fingerprints came back? And that's what allows you to do a full background investigation with fingerprints, correct?
For the record, Cesar Magrejo, Community Policy Analyst. Chair Howdy, you're correct. The provisional license would be immediately approved, but then it could be denied. The license would be expired until the board approves or denies the full licensure by endorsement application.
Okay, so members, any other questions? I'm going to do a quick check. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and move us into the testimony portion of the bill hearing. Broadcasting, can we check the telephone line for those wishing to testify in support of Assembly Bill 439?
Yes, Chair. To testify in support of AB 439, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 300, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening, Chair and Committee on Commerce and Labor. My name, for the record, is Tony Yarbrough. I represent nearly 9,000 members of the Veterans of Foreign Wars in the Department of Nevada. I also represent close to 500,000 members of the United Veterans Legislative Council as an officer and their past chairman. The UVLC is an organization of all the veterans organizations throughout the state. That includes all veterans, active duty military, National Guard, families, and advocates statewide. And obviously there's some of you that may even be taking advantage of some of our services and not even know it. I'm sure because you may have some history of veterans in your family, or maybe you have had direct experience as an active duty military service. That's why we exist. As we move forward, please remember them, the family sacrifices and the commitment that it takes to serve our country, and how proudly you support them. All we want is to the best for them. I will say in support of AB 439 that the Committee on Senior Citizens, Veterans, and Adults with Special Needs has consistently come up with some outstanding legislative adjustments that need to be made to make our world a much better place in transitional situations such as this. Matter of fact, Assemblywoman Bill Bray-Axelrod has another bill out there that we also support, which is related, which is AB 206. One of the things that comes out in all of our legislative symposiums that we deal with from veterans, directly from the veterans, is the thing about transitioning situations that involves potentially reciprocity or something along the lines where we can make it easier for a spouse to transfer easier with the other spouse that's changing orders. So in this case, I will tell you that I think this is a very good bill. There's a lot of things that are in here. It's well overdue. And this is one of our top priorities that we would like to see take place. And with that, I would like to say great thank you to Assemblywoman Bill Bray-Axelrod and also to Cesar Melgarejo, because I know he's deeply involved in this as well. And some of the others of you that sit on this committee are very supportive of veterans and veterans issues. And for that, I thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Oh, oops, I think I was on mute that entire time. So thank you so much for your testimony, sir, and for your service. Broadcasting, next caller, please.
Caller with the last three digits of 747, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Chair and committee members, for the record, my name is Andrew Lee Pilbit. And its last name spelled Lepeilbet, and I represent the combat wounded veterans of the Purple Heart in the state of Nevada and the 70,000 disabled American veterans in Nevada. And I am the current chair of the United Veterans Legislative Council. Tony Yarborough has already pretty much stated our entire case, so I would have to say at this point, ditto. This is an outstanding bill that's doing the right thing for our veterans, our spouses of our veterans, and our active military and their spouses. So the UVLC supports this bill fully. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony and for your service, sir. Broadcasting, next caller, please.
If you recently joined the call and would like to testify in support on AB 439, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you so much, Broadcasting. Can we check the telephone line for any opposition?
To testify in opposition on AB 439, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 237, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Marlene Lockard, Lockard, and it pains me very much to be testifying in opposition to this bill. However, under committee rules, I don't feel that I have any alternative. Representing the Nevada Women's Lobby, we have major concerns with the section that would remove the provisions requiring that child support requirements are met before receiving a license under the occupational licensing authorities. We think we could be helping a family solve one problem while creating a new, often disastrous problem for another family. And we would request that that portion of the bill be amended out. We also are concerned with a provision that does away with the fingerprinting provision. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Lockhart. Broadcasting, can we check the telephone line for any other callers in opposition?
To testify in opposition of AB 439, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in opposition.
Thank you, Broadcasting. Can we check the telephone line for anyone wishing to testify in the neutral position?
Yes, Chair, to testify in neutral on AB 439, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 080, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. We'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. For the record, this is Susan Fisher, SUSANFISHER, with McDonald Corrado, speaking this evening on behalf of the Nevada State Board of Osteopathic Medicine. Because our board has not had the opportunity to discuss this under the open meeting law, we are neutral on the bill at this time. We certainly support the intent of the bill and have already put into practice some of the suggestions or some of the requirements in this bill in AB 439. I would like to point out Section 2, subsection 3, with the fingerprints. By removing the fingerprints from the requirement from the endorsement application is a significant lowering of the bar for applicants and is not accorded any other class of applicant. Section 2, subsection 5, which requires the immediate provisional license, as Madam Chair, you mentioned, does not give the board the opportunity to verify the contents of the application. In practice, though, this is what we would likely do, but the board could more clearly state, or the bill could more clearly state, that the provisional license does not issue until the board receives the application and verifies that it complies with other terms of the bill. Also, with the provisional license being issued, the person could go ahead and practice even if the board identifies good cause to deny the application pursuant to Section 3 before we could complete the denial process that's set out in Section 2. Section 2.6 authorizes the board's executive director and president to issue a license between meetings. That's already our current practice. We sign off on endorsements between our monthly meetings all the time. Section 2.9a reduces the fee for endorsed licenses by half. There is a fiscal impact, but historically and realistically, there have only been 5 to 10 endorsements per year, so that's not a big deal. Section 4, where it requires the discounts for military veterans, a half discount. We already do that as well. And we do not charge any fees for active military, but we do discount by half for veterans and military spouses. Because of all the exceptions made in our Practice Act in sections 23 through 29, it might be possible for a non-military or non-veteran applicant to make equal protection challenge under the Nevada Constitution, because we're going to be treating 2 otherwise equal applicants differently just because one has joined the military at some point in his or her life. We just want to put that on the record. That could be an issue at some point. One thing that we identified that I think that we will need to change in the bill, and I can submit some language to you, a proposed amendment, is in Section 22, where it opens NRS 633.4335. This is an impediment to endorsement for physician assistants that's present in Section 27(1)B in current statute. If you opt to strike that section, which is in current statute, Section 27(1)B, then we would be able to license PAs by endorsement. But it currently states that they must be certified in a specialty recognized by the American Board of Medical Specialties or American Osteopathic Association, and that would need to come out. And I would be happy to answer. Oops, we don't do that at this point. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Fisher. Broadcasting, is there anyone else on the line to testify in the neutral position?
Yes, Chair. Caller with the last three digits of 997. If you could please slowly state and spell your name for the record, you'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening, Chair Houdigy and members of the committee. My name is Kat Miller. I'm the Director of Veteran Services for the state of Nevada, and I'm testifying in neutral today to share information regarding the issue of military spouse employment addressed in AB 439. Every 2 years, Nevada Veterans Service and Support Organizations meet to identify issues that they believe should be addressed through legislation, executive action, or other channels. During the 2020 Nevada Veterans Legislative Symposium, these organizations listed as priority 8 of 48 the need to create and support military spouse employment and reciprocity programs. For the last 4 years, the issue of military spouse employment, license portability, and other issues associated with their employment has come up and has been listed as a priority action. And Madam Chair, members of the committee, that concludes my comments.
Thank you for your testimony. Broadcasting, next caller.
Caller with the last three digits of 755. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Houdigy and members of the committee. Hello again. My name is Marlene Lockhart, Lockard, and I'm representing SEIU 1107. We are calling in neutral on this bill. We have concerns with respect to the nursing provisions, and we would appreciate an opportunity to work with the bill sponsor to receive more clarification. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lockhart. Broadcasting, next caller.
Chair, there are no more callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. And I would invite the bill sponsor back to give any closing remarks.
Thank you, Chair Houdigy and Commerce and Labor Committee. I am happy to work with both Ms. Lockhart and Ms. Fisher to get to this bill where there is a level of comfort. I think we can all agree that this is a good policy, but obviously we don't want any unintended consequences to get in way of safety of Nevadans. So thank you for your time. Thank you for hearing the bill. And once we get it there, I know we don't have a lot of time, but we'll work really hard the next few days to get something that I think everyone will be able to vote for. Thanks.
Thank you, Assemblymember Bill Bray Axelrod. With that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 439. Okay. Next, I will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 438. This is the last bill for our bill hearing today. Assembly Bill 438 revises provisions relating to dentistry. I believe we have Mr. Alfredo Alonso here to present the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alfredo Alonso with the law firm of Lewis Roca, today on behalf of the Dental Board. And what you have before you today, I think, is it started out, I think, a little confusing for folks. I think as if they've delved into it, they'll understand where we're coming from. We look at this very simply as the three aspects to it: reform, access, transparency, and accountability. What you will see as we go through this bill is it's obviously very hard when you're making change, and I think that this board, as many others, have done the same thing over and over again for decades. The hope here is that we have a new system that will allow for more fairness in the disciplinary process. Frivolous and other such complaints will be vetted first before they're actually brought to a board. So again, the fact that the receptionist was rude to you may not fall into this category because it's not, it wouldn't be considered standard of care. And so I think that by adding to the standards, reforming the board. I think the board's position on this ultimately is that you're going to end up having a much more streamlined process and a fairer one for everyone involved. I think it's very important to understand why. We've had many problems, obviously, with this board over the years, but what you have before you are members of the board that are practically brand new. In fact, there are a few that were just recently placed on the board, and each one of them is dedicated to doing the right thing here. The first thing they asked us to do is look at the governor's audit. What are we doing wrong? What have the previous boards been doing wrong? And I think that they've taken that to heart and those criticisms, and this bill takes in some of those recommendations. They've also listened to all of you during many of the board related hearings during the interim. They've heard some of those remarks echoed over and over again at some of the things that need to be done with respect to staff being too powerful. Really, the accountability should be on the board. They're the ones that are ultimately making those decisions. And so it shouldn't be a situation where a staff person can, no matter how well-meaning, they shouldn't be making decisions on what the board will ultimately see on a disciplinary action, et cetera. And then obviously the access issue. How do we make sure that Nevadans have access to care in every way possible? Are there creative ways in which we can provide additional access to the underserved? And the board had a couple of pretty good ideas on it that are also in this bill. I'd like to introduce Casey Steitler, who is also on video here, I believe. And Casey is one of the attorneys in our office that helped draft this measure. And I want to preface his testimony with the fact that this is nothing new. What I keep hearing that some of this language is groundbreaking. Well, if groundbreaking is taking existing Nevada law of other boards and then looking at other boards within the region and taking some of the best ideas they've got, then I guess we are groundbreaking. But I'd like to think that we are just simply looking at what works, and that is what is in this bill. And I'd like to turn it over to Casey, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Yes, Mr. Alonso. Mr. Steitler, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so as Mr. Alonso was saying, the bill really addresses three primary issues. First, the bill will clarify and strengthen the board's oversight and enforcement authority, specifically on disciplinary matters. The bill also takes some additional steps in clarifying that there are employees of the board and that the executive director serve as at-will employees at the pleasure of the board. The bill also clarifies and in some ways sort of modifies some of the requirements that are in place for the board to grant a licensure by endorsement, with the primary goal being to kind of streamline that process and provide additional access to care. And specifically regarding the board's oversight authority, as Mr. Alonso had mentioned, the language in the bill is specifically in response to the Division of Internal Audit's report from June of 2019. And that report specifically advised the board to take action to strengthen its oversight and investigative authority. And for just one example of something that was brought up in the report, it specifically identified the previous practice of having what was referred to as a disciplinary screening officer, or a DSO, who had the authority to review and dismiss complaints without any review or action by the board itself. So effectively giving a single employee of the board full influence over decisions regarding public health and safety and the livelihoods of licensees in the state of Nevada. So in short, the bill is really focused on trying to ensure that those requirements for the audit are met and increasing access. So with that, I can provide a summary of the bill.
That would be great. Thank you, Mr. Steitler.
No problem. So Section 2 of the bill amends NRS Chapter 631 to include language that clarifies that the board may employ certain employees necessary in the discharge of its duties, and that those employees are at will and serve at the pleasure of the board. And it also provides the executive director of the board the ability to appoint and remove employees. Section 2 of the bill also adds language which would prohibit a hearing officer hired by the board from serving in any other capacity for the board, and sets forth that a hearing officer who is terminated or resigns may not be rehired for a period of 2 years, all in order to avoid potential conflicts of interest. Section 3 of the bill sets out requirements for the board to grant a license by endorsement to practice dental hygiene in an effort to increase access by providing a method for those practitioners who are licensed in other jurisdictions to practice in the state. Section 4 of the bill clarifies that the executive director is an at-will employee of the board as well, and who serves at the pleasure of the board. Section 5 of the bill clarifies that a practitioner is not considered in the practice of dentistry for licensing purposes where the practitioner is treating a patient during a course of continuing education that is conducted at a permanent facility registered with the board that provides postgraduate continuing education, and the care is done under the supervision of a Nevada licensed practitioner. Currently, the only real method available for an out-of-state licensee to come into the state and participate in one of these continuing education courses that involves treating a patient would be to actually physically bring a patient that the licensee had treated in their home jurisdiction previously in order to participate in one of these continuing education courses. So we believe that this is going to be a good opportunity to have practitioners from other states come in and participate in these courses, and especially because these courses generally tend to offer services at a discounted or much lower rate, which will help to increase access as well. Section 6 of the bill removes language requiring that a practitioner who has issued a specialist's license to submit to the board and maintain a certificate of diplomate from a certifying board within 6 years of their licensure as a specialist. The certificate is essentially an additional requirement above and beyond the general requirements in order to practice a specialty, and this we see as an impediment to having additional specialists who come to Nevada and are able to provide access to care. So we've removed that language, that requirement, in order to make it easier for specialists to practice here in Nevada. Section 7 of the bill revises the process by which the board will grant a licensure by endorsement for the practice of dentistry. Notably, the language in this section is slightly more permissive than existing language in Nevada Administrative Code Section 361030, because it provides additional avenues where an applicant can meet the requirement that they have been in the practice for the 5 years preceding their application by either serving as a faculty member at an accredited dentistry program or completing an accredited dentistry program. So again, we're trying to make it a little bit easier to get additional practitioners here in the state of Nevada. Section 8 of the bill amends NRS Section 631350 by limiting the amount of any fine that may be assessed by the board. Currently, the language was ambiguous. So we've set a specific limit on the amount of any fine that may be assessed by the board. And we've also given the board the ability to issue written warnings and other correspondence that may be considered a lesser course of disciplinary action if the board deems that disciplinary action is necessary. Section 8 of the bill also seeks to further define the scope of the board's authority to take disciplinary action for certain matters, and specifically we have carved out fee disputes, insurance claims, and misconduct that has occurred more than 5 years prior to the date of the complaint in order to ensure that the complaints that the board is hearing are within, number one, within their jurisdiction, are associated with the actual standard of care that the practitioners are providing, and trying to kind of limit the total number of maybe unnecessary complaints or complaints that may be better handled in other avenues. Section 9 of the bill it contains language that requires that before any disciplinary action is taken, the findings and conclusions of the investigator or the review panel that conducted the initial investigation be considered. So we've included that requirement to ensure that there is throughout the disciplinary process a record of findings and recommendations that the board can consider in making a decision on whether or not to proceed with any disciplinary action. So we're, again, kind of trying to focus on accountability and transparency. Section 10 of the bill removes the requirement that complaints to the board be verified. And this is something that we think, requiring the verification of the complaints was really an additional obstacle for members of the public to file these complaints. In truth, there's many members of the public who may not fully understand what it means to have their complaint verified. And we kind of saw that as an additional obstacle or burden for members of the public to have to overcome in order to bring valid complaints to the board for review. Section 10 of the bill also requires that the board designate a committee consisting of 4 members of the board to review and investigate each complaint and determine whether each complaint is, number one, within the board's purview and jurisdiction, and whether there's a reasonable basis for the complaint. If the committee does determine that the complaint is within the board's purview and has a reasonable basis, then the committee must refer the complaint to the board or a hearing officer or panel that has been delegated authority by the board to hear and investigate the complaint. So this is in direct response to some of the recommendations in the audit where we had a single employee making the decision as to whether or not a complaint had merit without any action, oversight, or review by the board. Section 10 also requires that the board publish a summary of its meetings and that all complaints that are reviewed by this committee have all identifying information redacted from the complaint prior to being reviewed by the committee. The redacted information will not be revealed unless and until the committee refers the complaint to the board, hearing officer, or panel. And again, we're trying to ensure that when these complaints are being reviewed by the committee, they're done so in a manner that avoids as much as possible any potential favoritism or bias. So we've essentially required that these complaints be redacted in order to avoid that possibility. Section 11 of the bill clarifies that an investigator who has been delegated authority by the board can conduct informal hearings. Some of this language in Section 11 is kind of a cleanup to clarify that when the authority has been delegated, there will be a hearing, there will be an investigation and an informal hearing. Section 11 also clarifies and specifically states that an investigator appointed by the board may not dismiss a complaint, again, in direct response to the audit. This section also requires the board to hold its own hearing where the board will consider the investigator and or the review panel's report and recommendation on any investigation, again, creating a record and ensuring, number one, that there's accountability and also trying to avoid the potential multiplication of efforts in terms of the investigation. And Section 12 of the bill clarifies that a panel may be appointed by the board to review and investigate and hold an informal hearing for disciplinary matters. Section 12 of the bill also adds language stating that before the board takes any disciplinary action, the review panel appointed for that complaint must submit their findings and recommendations to the board for investigation, which thereafter must be considered by the board. And with that, if there are any questions.
And Madam Chair, if I could jump in real quick on one other matter before you move on. Again, this section, like all of the sections in this bill, were vetted internally, reviewing the audit, reviewing what other boards do. We did not seek counsel from others. I know that's counterintuitive in this process, but again, you're trying to reform a regulatory and a board that this is what they do. They're supposed to take care of the bad actors and complaints when they come across to their desk. So I thought it was very important that we do this in a vacuum of sorts, try to rely on the audit and what other information that we had, and that is what's before you here. So again, we can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Alonso. And Mr. Alonso and Mr. Stetler, as we go to questions, I just want to remind everyone just to please identify yourself for our committee secretary before answering questions. Okay, perfect. Members, do we have any questions? Assemblymember Duran.
Thank you, Chair Howdigi, and thank you for bringing this board and this bill to our committee. First of all, I was just wondering, you said that you will not issue a fine or discipline if the event occurred or the complaint occurred 5 years prior. Is there limitation of time that you investigate a complaint? I mean, it's like the statute of limitations, even without filing a lawsuit or anything, has a statute of limitations. So I'm just wondering, why does it take so long, or why are we not investigating or have a time limit on the complaints being filed? Or am I missing something?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Duran. For the record, Casey Steitler. The primary goal in creating what is in effect kind of a sort of statute of limitations is really to try to limit the types of complaints that the board can hear. And when we start talking about complaints that are based on events that occurred five or more years prior to the date of the complaint, it becomes very difficult for the board to investigate those types of complaints due to the fact that so much time has passed. But with that said, it's really more an effort of trying to kind of cull down those complaints to the ones that the board has authority and jurisdiction to hear, but also has the ability to really investigate. And once something's occurred more than 5 years prior to that, it becomes a very big burden for the board to be able to really thoroughly investigate those types of complaints.
Follow-up, Chair, please.
Yes, Assemblymember Duran, follow-up.
No, I'm just trying to say, discipline should be corrective and not punitive. So I'm just wondering why, it's even allowed to hear a complaint or take a complaint after a certain amount of time, because again, things happen, you don't remember, things get lost. So I'm just wondering, is it just taking that long for the board to get to that complaint, or is it's being allowed to just, I could file a complaint on somebody 5 years ago if I felt like I didn't like him at this point or something?
Thank you for the follow-up, Assemblywoman. For the record, Casey Steitler, if I understand your question and concern correctly, as far as the board's ability to investigate something that occurred more than 5 years ago, that really just kind of becomes a practical challenge more than anything. So yes, the selection of 5 years was based primarily on practical concerns in terms of the ability to investigate. But there are obviously circumstances where complaints may be filed in bad faith, and someone may look to an event that occurred 3, 4, 5, 7 years ago for a basis for that type of complaint, and that's really why we've put in place the committee system where all of those complaints would still be vetted by a committee of the board to determine whether or not there is a reasonable basis for those complaints. But in terms of the, like I said, the 5-year limitation, that was really selected out of practical concerns.
Madam Chair, if I could.
Yes, Mr. Alonso, please.
Alfredo Alonso, for the record again, and to Assemblywoman Duran. Practitioners are required to keep records up to 5 years. That's another practical matter here, because if you go past that 5-year period and someone files a complaint, we simply wouldn't have the records in some cases to be able to investigate properly. So that's why that number was chosen. One of the reasons, anyway.
So I guess follow-up, Chair, or just a different point. I'm just wondering, why are we allowing, somebody to file a complaint after such a long period of time? I get that. I'm just, again, I don't, working as a grievance specialist, we tell the companies you have to file your complaints or your discipline in a timely manner and not be able to continue to let this all go, because it's just not good practice. That's in my mind.
And Madam Chair, to you and through you, to the Assemblywoman Alfredo Alonso, again, for the record, we don't disagree with you. I think that's a number that has been used in other boards. That's an awfully long time, but it's also the time period they require to keep records. So we figured at least we're setting a boundary, which is something we don't have right now.
Thank you, Mr. Alonso. And Mr. Steitler, please feel free to go directly to the members when answering questions. Okay. Assemblymember Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the bill presentation. I have some clarifying questions. So on Section 2, subsection 5, the executive director may, with the approval of the board, discharge an employee. But it's not clear if the executive director needs to obtain prior approval or can discharge someone and then obtain board approval. Is it supposed to go one way or the other, or is it supposed to be kind of wide open here?
Assemblywoman, for the question. I think the intent here is really to ensure that again the board has adequate oversight over staff. So here the approval would be a pre-approval. So there may be instances, I think, where the executive director would be in a position where they needed a quick decision, and there may be internal policies and procedures in place in order to gain that approval. But the idea here is to really, per the direction that we received in the audit, ensure that the board is being consulted and is giving an acknowledgement or an approval in order for the executive director to carry out those responsibilities. So it would be something that they would need to get approval for prior to.
Thank you. And then on Section 7, for the dentistry, for getting the license by endorsement to practice dentistry, Section, I guess, 1G, if I'm looking at it right, that for the endorsement, part of that would require that they pay for the application, examination, and renewal fees. And I guess after hearing the last bill, my question is, if they don't have to take the examination, is it normal practice to charge them for the examination?
Thank you, Assemblywoman Considine, for the question. I think the intent here is not to charge applicants for a licensure by endorsement for an examination that they have not taken. That's something that I think we may need to clarify based on the current practices of the board for some of their other licensing procedures. But I think the intent here is not to charge them unnecessarily for an examination that they did not take.
Thank you. And then, Madam Chair, I have one other question, but I don't want to take up too much time, so I can ask it after everyone else is done, if that's easier.
Okay, you can go ahead, Assemblymember Considine.
Oh, thank Thank you, Madam Chair. So my last question is concerning, I guess, the area that Assemblywoman Duran was talking about earlier, about what the board shall not shall not impose disciplinary action for, and then under A, it lists a few things, but the last one caught my eye. It says, for the length of time a licensee took to perform a procedure. And I don't know if this is an issue, but I know one of the areas of discipline that the board can give out is just like a letter of concern. So I'm wondering why something like the length of time for a procedure to take place is specifically called out as an area to not obtain discipline over. I was wondering if you could explain that one to me.
Thank you again for the question, Assemblywoman Considine. I think the intent there is to avoid.
Identify yourself.
Oh, thank you. I apologize. For the record, Casey Steitler is really to try to vet out or limit potential complaints that are based on the length of time that it takes a practitioner to conduct a procedure, specifically because those. It's not necessarily something that really falls within the standard of care if for some reason the practitioner doesn't have the ability to carry out a procedure. And again, that's something where we're trying to kind of limit the overall jurisdiction of the board to make sure that complaints that fall within that area of standard of care are really the ones that the board hears.
Thank you. I was not familiar with saying that as a length of time, and I don't know if that means like something can take 3 years to have some work done on, specific work done, and that's a normal amount of time. It just jumped out at me, but thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I could jump in real quick to Alfredo Alonso again, to Assemblywoman Considine. One of the issues that came out also was that was one of the sort of ways that that other boards would seek out complaints on dentists. So it was unfortunately a way to get a complaint, and frankly, that's the type of complaint that we don't want is a frivolous one. If it's genuinely someone hasn't done their job and the standard of care comes into effect, for instance, it takes a year to get a filling in. I mean, obviously the board's going to take that into account. But if it's simply it took 2 weeks, and this is the thing, it took 2 weeks, it took too long to get the impressions. That is the process that I think we're trying to avoid, those types of frivolous complaints. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. It does make sense. But in your two examples, even though one of them seemed to be sort of egregious under the way that this is written, neither of them would be subject to discipline. I guess that's kind of what I'm seeing.
And we could look at that if in certain egregious cases, obviously, we want to make sure that the board is, if it truly is egregious, and we'll take it back and look at that and see if there's some kind of standard that we can create and look at other boards and see how they handle that as well.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Okay, Assemblymember Tolles.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I have a few questions that have been touched on, but looking at Section 8, subsection, I guess, 3A. So the board shall not impose disciplinary action for any grounds, including without limitation, matters related solely to the amount of a fee charged by a licensee, the amount of an insurance claim, or length of time of license you took to perform a procedure. I know we just touched on that. I have that same concern. So what action do we take if somebody isn't paying their fees or
I'll go ahead and take this if that's okay. Alfredo Alonso again for the record. Again, I mean, it's about standard of care. You know, if I think what we're seeing or what we've seen historically is a huge backlog of complaints that go something like this. The receptionist was mean to me. I didn't hear the dentist the first time he told me what the estimate was, so I was unhappy with the ultimate cost. These are all things that can be dealt with in other ways. The board should be only about the standard of care. Unfortunately, you can only imagine how many complaints come in. And the hope is that we're making it easier to have those complaints come in. And so that's going to be an increase because we're trying to make it easier for the public to be part of this process. But at the same time, we want to make sure that it is about standard of care.
Follow up, Chair?
Yes,
okay.
Assembly Member Tolles.
So just to be clear, if I'm a dentist and I'm a licensee and I don't pay my fees, there's no repercussions?
Madam Chair, if I may, sorry, I had some difficulty getting off of mute there. Assemblywoman Tolles, I think it's important to note that the language immediately preceding that in Section 8, which remains, is that it specifically cites, right, that the following activities may be punished as provided in subsection 1, including illegal practice of dentistry, dental hygiene, or dental therapy, unprofessional conduct, or violating any regulations adopted by the board or the provisions of this chapter. So outside of the new language that we have, which specifically states, right, the board will not impose disciplinary action for any grounds not described in this chapter. The board still has the authority to disciplinary action for any violation of the regulations or any other requirements or standards within the chapter. So the carve out that we have added here is essentially just limiting the board's jurisdiction to those matters that are explicitly within the board's regulations and within the chapter itself.
Mr. Steitler, just a quick reminder to state your name for the record before answering questions. Identify yourself.
I don't know if it's late and I'm just not getting it, but I still am hearing that I'm still not getting an answer that if I was a dentist, I could go 20 years and never pay a fee.
I think I might want to.
It may be totally wrong. I may be late and I just didn't eat enough of my sandwich. I'm sorry.
And if I could, Assemblymember Tolles, if you're referring to the Section 8, Sub 3.8, I don't think, and then Mr. Alonso or Mr. Steitler, please correct me if I'm incorrect, but that section applies to a patient a fees charged to a patient, not fees paid by the dentist. And so I think that's you might just be reading it a little wrong. Assemblymember Tolles, because that section 838 means they cannot they cannot file a complaint or take disciplinary action by a fee charged by the dentist to the patient, not the fees the dentist pays. And so, Mr. Alonso and Mr. Steitler, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
The Assemblywoman, yes.
I got that wrong.
Yeah, in other states, the boards have had so many complaints about how much I don't like the fact that my dentist charges me this much. I mean, that's just not a standard of care question or issue. And so many states have just simply said, we don't take those because they're not pertinent here. If you don't want to pay the fee, then don't go to the dentist is basically their position. But I think at the end of the day, this is really about making sure it's about standard of care.
Okay, thank you. And you're right, Chair. I was misreading that. So I appreciate the correction on the record, and we could maybe scrap that whole section out of the minutes. But I appreciate clarification. But I do still share some of the concerns that Assemblywoman Considine also raised. So thank you.
Thank you for your questions, Assemblymember Tolles. I'm going to go to Assemblymember Dickman next.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. My question is quick, and I'm not sure who it's for. Possibly LCB or possibly Mr. Alonso can answer it for me. But is it the $5,000, not to exceed $5,000 fine in Section 8 sub C that's causing this to require a 2/3 majority vote? Because I thought in the explanation you said that the fees before were unclear, so you're kind of putting a cap on them, right? So do you think that's what caused the 2/3?
No,
Or is there something else?
Assemblywoman, no, we're not raising fees. All we're saying is if there's a fine, we want a cap on it. We don't want, I think the board's position is not to break a dentist. I mean, if they've made a mistake, the whole point of this is correction. It's how you correct. And so I think the purpose of the cap is so that, again, not just this board, but future boards can't just have an unfettered ability to fine at will. There's got to be, again, a paper trail. There's got to be a method to it. And then you got to have caps on how much you can charge or fine someone.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's what I was reading. But I'm just wondering why LCB put a 2/3 requirement on this bill. Anyone know?
We can ask our Assemblymember Dickman. We can ask our legal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sam Plus, Committee Counsel. If I could just get a moment to look into that question a bit more, and I don't think it will take that long, but I do want to verify something before I answer that.
Oh, and I think I may answer. Your question was, you were wondering why it requires a 2/3 or if it does?
No, why it does. It says requires 2/3.
Yeah.
And I can't see why.
Okay. Well, we can give, we will give our legal time to look that up. And then if you have any other questions, Assemblymember Dickman?
That was just my question.
Okay,
so, thank you.
Assemblymember O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the time. I just want to stand with Assemblymember Duran. I do think 5 years time limit seems a little lengthy. To use the term statute of limitations, if you haven't figured out you had bad dental work within 5 years, I question how bad it really was. But here's my question, if I may. How many complaints on the average year does the board get?
To the Assemblyman, I don't have an answer for you at this minute, but I will find out. I'll find out and get that for you.
And Madam Chair, I've got two more questions. They sort of build upon one another, if I may.
Yes, Assemblymember O'Neill, please.
Who do they currently use for their investigators? Or is it another dentist, I mean, or is it a somebody professionally in the program, or?
Assemblyman O'Neill, Alfredo Alonso again for the record. I think they hire licensed investigators. You've got folks that both on the private and the public side. I will confirm exactly where we find those folks and get you a little more detail on it. So I'd be glad to do that and get back to you on it.
No, I was just curious if they use, because I remember years ago the veterinarian board used to assign it to various vets to do investigations. That way they could get through them quicker. They knew the standard of care, et cetera. So I understand you actually go out, or they go out and get PIs who aren't necessarily dentists or experts in any of the medical or dental field.
Yeah, Mr. O'Neill. Yeah, I have no doubt that these individuals have at least some extensive knowledge of the world of dentistry. How much are they? Are they former dentists? That sort of thing I do not know, and I will find out for you.
Okay. Because in my last question, Chair, if I may, and it may be more of a statement.
Yes, Assembly Member, please.
So I'm gathering they want to change some of the practices by not allowing this investigator to discharge frivolous cases initially without going to a board. Have there been issues already or that require this new change in procedure where the investigator discharged or declared a frivolous and was later found not to be? You know, by any chance?
For the record, Casey Steitler, Assemblyman O'Neill. Yes, so the basis for a lot of what we're proposing in this bill is from that previous audit report. And as the audit report doesn't go into too many specific details for specific cases, but for example, there were situations identified in the audit where the investigator had a close professional relationship with someone who the complaint had actually been filed against. So under the previous method of doing things, that investigator or the DSO, as the case may be, would technically have the ability without oversight from the board. So the board would not have the opportunity or the ability to actually determine whether or not that claim was frivolous, had the ability to just dismiss that claim without any oversight, without any other opinions. So the structure in and of itself really lent itself to the possibility of an investigator having some type of relationship or association with someone who a complaint was filed against and potentially having that serve as a basis for favoritism or bias.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me the time.
Absolutely, Assemblymember O'Neill. And I'm going to go back to our legal counsel, Mr. Cross. And I apologize, Mr. Cross. I believe that I should have probably directed that question and sent it to fiscal and not to legal. But I'm so glad you have an answer for it. So when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sam Quas, Committee Counsel. And no, this is perfectly within line of a legal question. So section 3 and 7 authorize new types of licenses by endorsement, and there's a fee associated with those, and because that then generates or increases public revenue, 2/3 would be required.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. I appreciate that. Thank you for taking the time and getting that answer to us during the meeting. Assembly members, any other questions? Assemblymember Tolles.
Thank you, Chair. I just put this in the chat, but I'll go ahead and ask here. Is that audit available anywhere online? I think part of the challenge here is just trying to understand what all is in this bill, and you referenced that it's to fall in line with the audit, and that might help clarify some things if we could have that as a comparison.
For the record, Casey Steitler, Assemblywoman Tolles. We have a copy of the audit. I'm sure it's available, and we'll make sure that that you have a copy of it, and that the other members of the committee have a copy as well.
Thank you, Mr. Steitler. If you get it to our committee manager, she will make sure to share it with the members of the committee. And then Assemblymember Hardy, I'm so sorry I skipped right over you. You were in line for a question.
Thank you, Chair. No problem. But this is actually the perfect place for my question, since we brought up the audit. So what I'm gathering from the questions mentioning in the audit and the conversation, that there have been issues with the previous boards, and so thus the need for this bill. So I'm just kind of curious, when you're working on the language for the bill, and things that need to be corrected, did you seek input like from dentists or the Nevada Dental Association, maybe for their ideas of how some of those changes could best be addressed? I'm just curious.
For the record, Casey Steitler, Assemblywoman Hardy. As Mr. Alonso kind of mentioned at the beginning, you know, the call really to action in the audit was to ensure that the board itself was taking appropriate action and has in place appropriate procedures to ensure that the disciplinary process, including any investigation, is conducted in a manner that avoids as much as possible the possibility of favoritism or bias. And there are specific instances I identified in that audit where it specifically outlined the procedural steps that led to the possibility, and in some cases, the very strong suggestion that some favoritism or bias had worked its way into the system. But with that said, given that the accountability for this process is really going to be on the board, and it's the board's charge to ensure that public health and safety needs are met through this process, and that the public health and safety are protected through this process. Our approach with the bill was really to focus on those procedural questions with the board and how we could put in place measures that, regardless of who the members of the board are at any given time, would prevent as much as possible the possibility of bias or favoritism. So given that it's really the board's charge, the board is going to be the ones held responsible if this procedure does not work. We took the approach of focusing on the board's internal interpretation of the audit as best as we could meet those requirements and recommendations.
Thank you. And is one follow-up okay?
Yes, Member Hardy.
Okay, I appreciate that answer, that more in-depth explanation of how this came to be. Boards and function of board is something that I'm learning. I've learned more than I knew in 2019. So this is just for my own information. So in general, like boards, say it's a dental board or an optician board, are those people on those boards, they're not like practicing dentists or opticians or whatever it is that sit on those boards?
Assemblywoman Hardy, Alfredo Alonso, for the record. In the case of the dental board, they're all practicing dentists. So it's a tough job. I mean, they are put in a position where they are practicing, and then they're also there to basically judge their peers to some degree and follow the law. So it's a tough job no matter what. And I think that the way they did it, it may not be intuitive in this case because the legislative process is always one where you work with everybody to find a solution. But with regulatory boards, it's different. And I think that the reason it is because, again, they're enforcing and they're potentially investigating a complaint on the dentist down the street from you, perhaps. And so we thought the best way to start that is look at the audit, try to interpret the audit as best as we can, and then understand some of the questions and issues that came up during the interim over the past two sessions, or two interims, excuse me. And then afterwards, obviously, leave it in your hands as the legislature to determine whether we're right or not. And that was our attempt to do this as fairly and I think as unbiased as we possibly could.
Thank you. I appreciate your answers, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Hardy. Assembly Vice Chair Carlton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, very much. And I apologize for my tardiness this evening. I was working on some things for tomorrow. I just have a brief statement to make, and I want to thank the committee for allowing the bill draft, and I want to thank the board for their work. They have reached out to me numerous times over the interim to have conversations about the history of the board. things that have happened in the past because they wanted to get a full feeling for where we've been. And when you look through a lot of the minutes, I've been involved in these dental issues since about 2001. And I understand what they're trying to do. And I think and I'm glad they brought up the audit. And I would really think that if folks take a look at that audit and look especially in the key findings. And then if you look towards the end of the audit, there's actually a list of recommendations that the auditors made towards the board. And very rarely when you sit on the audit subcommittee, do you see where recommendations have been rejected by a board. So if you read the minutes of that particular audit meeting, I think you'll find it very enlightening as to the problems that we're trying to solve. And I think it's always really important for us to remember that boards are there for public safety. They're the regulator. Associations are there to advocate for the profession, and they have their job and they do it very well, but the board is there to protect the public. So this was a difficult issue for them. I know they've done their homework. No bill is perfect. I know there's going to be some issues, but I just want to thank those that are involved, and especially the new members of the board that the governor just appointed, I believe, last year, so that they can actually deal with these issues. I appreciate their hard work. They're doing everything that they can to address the issues that the state brought up with the board. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carlton. Members, any other questions? Assembly Member Kasama.
Thank you, Chair. When we're talking about the boards, one thing came to mind. It is a long day, and there was another bill today or yesterday regarding some boards, and on those it actually specified the board members, two actively practicing or one appointed by the governor. And I notice whatever it might be, I notice on this one here, it didn't really specify the makeup of the board. And is that something that should be done, or why was that not put in there?
For the record, Casey Steitler. Thank you for the question, Assemblymember Kasama. And correcting me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like what you're describing is the makeup of the entire board itself. And I don't believe that any of the sections of the bill specifically address or modify the makeup of the board itself. I believe that's in another portion of the chapter, but I can get that information for you so that you can see exactly how the board itself is appointed and how those members are selected.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, I've done the last call for questions, and it looks like we've got all the questions out there. So at this time, I'm going to move to the testimony and support. Broadcasting, could we check the telephone line for anyone wishing to testify in support?
Testify in support on AB 438. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you would like to testify in support on AB 438, press star 9 now. Caller with the last 3 digits of 846, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 846, please press star 6 to unmute.
Hello, I'm calling in. My name is Sandy Connor, and I'm calling in support of AB 438. I've been following what's been going on with the dental board for years, and have been part of public members lobbying to make changes to the dental board for the past several years. And we've met with various legislators over the years. And I wanted to say that one of the things that Assemblywoman, I believe, as Hardy pointed out, was that the Nevada Dental Association is a trade. It's representing the trade and the dentists and not the public. And prior to Governor Sisolak replacing this entire board, the dental board was comprised of mainly members of the Nevada Dental Association, including the president of the Nevada Dental Association. And as a result of the audit and replacing the dental board now, you have mainly all members that aren't a part of any association. And, you know, when you have dentists that are competing in the marketplace, it's really important to have neutral members. AB 438 was drafted as a result of the state audit and a lot of the alleged bad acts by the old board. It seeks to fix the problems that we as the public had lobbied against, and one of the main things was the complaint process. And I see that the Nevada Dental Association, you know, is opposing this bill, and we believe that they're trying to go back to the old ways. They're talking about a peer review process. There was never a peer review process with the dental board. The peer review process was with the Nevada Dental Association. They are there to help and protect the dentist, not the public. And the audit will show, as you read it, that there were complaints that went uninvestigated, because if you belong to the Nevada Dental Association, the complaint would get sent out of the dental board and over to the dental association. So that stopped with the audit. We don't want to go back to that. There needs to be anonymity so that if a member of the public complains and the dentist looking at it, it could be a complaint about him or herself. It could be a complaint about their best friend. It could be about the person they hate the most. So, you know, again, as the public that have been lobbying for years, we really support this bill because there is anonymity and because there is more oversight. So to have a complaints committee review it to make sure there's jurisdiction, and then to have the review panel review that, because that wasn't happening before. Before, there was one investigator who wasn't a board member who would review the complaints and decide to move forward or not move forward. It was in the hands of one person, and that's not right. It needs to be anonymous, it needs to be by the whole board, and there needs to be checks and double checks. And before I run out of time here, the other thing is, I made some notes, I'm sorry. The other thing is that the audit, section 12 that they're talking about is to avoid favoritism or abuse by one of the investigators who may dismiss it, and that's again in the audit. And then the last thing is opening up access to care. It's almost impossible to get into a dentist. I've tried getting into a dentist, and sometimes it takes 2-3 months to get in. And I believe that opening up access to care is really good. But again, thank you.
For your testimony. Broadcasting, next caller, please.
There are no more callers in support at this time.
Okay, thank you. Let's move into opposition. If we could check the telephone line for those wishing to testify in opposition.
To testify in opposition on AB 438, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 602, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening, honorable members of the Assembly, Commerce and Labor Committee, and Honorable Chair Hadagi. For the record, my name is Eddie Ableser, EDDIE-ABLESER. I'm here this evening representing the Nevada Dental Association, and we are in opposition to Assembly Bill 438. Let me be clear, the first time a member of the Nevada Dental Association, any member of the team, any associate in the community, or our sister organizations in the community has seen this bill was last Friday when it was released and introduced into committee. Moreover, we're aware that even members of the current board were not even aware that this bill is being brought forward by the board. The claims of excluding dentists from participating in this bill because of bias certainly makes no sense. Dentists, dental hygienists are board members. Dentists and dental hygienists throughout Nevada are participating in subcommittees drafting regulations. Practitioners within the state are participating on high levels drafting important pieces of regs and statute in many different areas, and to exclude seems foolish. All of the regulatory boards in other professions have open and transparent processes in which they actually include members of their profession for feedback, consensus building, and in most committees and boards in Nevada, the board would host public comment and engagement in open and transparent setting. The irony that this board is attempting to create transparency provisions, yet created language in a vacuum to amend statute that is completely non-transparent at all. The history of this board is riddled with controversy and abuse. The last thing our industry needs is to provide even more concentrated power to the board and their staff. This board is going to increase fees in order to pay for the growing new staff that the board is wanting to bring on in Section 2. More concerning is the swift action that Governor Sisolak recently took in replacing board members from this board and their staff because of abuse of authority afforded to them. And with this bill in Section 2, 10, 11, and 12, the bill that was introduced perhaps from staff members of the current board is sponsoring language that is giving themselves even more authority and power without that oversight. While prior commentators mentioned that the intent is to strengthen oversight, this bill actually does the opposite. It creates a circular path of accountability where, according to Section 10, members of the board can meet without open meeting laws to refer themselves actions to take disciplinary action to the broader board. Where's the accountability in that circular logic? Moreover, in this bill, Section 11, it removes the ability for an investigator to dismiss a frivolous complaint and again consolidates all the authority to a board for those decisions. Members, I'd like to call your attention to the fact that as this hearing commenced, there was not one dentist, not one dental hygienist or therapist, an in-the-trenches practitioner who understands the practice of dentistry that was asked to participate in this hearing who might provide better insight than the legal analysis provided this evening. Our dentists and dental hygienists were not asked for input, guidance. They have expert knowledge.
Mr. Ebelser, I'm so sorry. I'm going to need you to wrap up your testimony. We have quite a bit of other callers that we need to get to in the queue. If you have any written remarks, you can please provide them to our committee manager. We'll include them in the record and make sure every committee member gets them.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ebelser. Broadcasting, next caller, please.
Caller with the last three digits of 347, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Sharonda Slater Barraza. First name S as in Sam, Heron, D as in dog, A. Last name Strider Barraza, S as in Sam, T as in Tom, R-I-D as in dog, E-R, hyphen, D as in boy, A-R-R-A, Z as in zebra, A. I am a dentist in Las Vegas, and I have practiced for 3 years, and I am opposing this bill. One of the main reasons is because of what Mr. Abelester has just mentioned, that this bill was rushed and proposed without any input from any dentist who this bill impacts the most. So for that reason, I oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Broadcasting, next caller.
Caller with the last three digits of 528, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good evening, Chair and Assembly members. My name is Dr. Kelly McGinley, first name Kellie, last name McGinley, and I'm a board-certified pediatric dentist and diplomat of pediatric dentistry. I practice in Reno, Nevada. In addition to what is being stated in opposition, I am opposed to AB 438. This bill was rushed and purposed without input from dentists, and in particular, specialists like myself. Specialists are held to a high standard of care, and diplomat status is imperative to specialty services, for example, pediatric dentistry, who care for our children in the state of Nevada. I am opposed to AB 438, as Nevada dentists are the ones who will be impacted the most by this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Broadcasting, next caller.
Chair, there are no more callers in opposition at this time.
Okay, can we switch to those wishing to testify in neutral?
Yes, Chair, to testify in neutral on AB 438, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 322, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Gregory Hunter, G-R-E-G-O-R-Y, last name Hunter, Hunter. I had actually tried to
log in under opposition to this bill. I don't know if that matters or if that needs to be changed before I begin speaking.
We'll move your testimony into opposition, sir. You can go ahead. Please continue.
Okay. My name is, as mentioned, my name is Gregory Hunter. I'm an oral and maxillofacial surgeon practicing in Las Vegas, Nevada. I would also point out that I am a anesthesia examiner for the board, and as previously noted, no input was sought other than from the legal counsel of the board. While I absolutely believe that reform is necessary, and as has been mentioned several times, the previous makeup of the board had committed some grievous errors. The fact of the matter is that this bill was rushed, did not allow for any input from dentists or dental hygienists, even as noted. They're the ones who are most likely or will be most impacted by this bill. The lack of transparency for discipline and due process is missing from this bill. Even as pointed out, the language was allegedly supposed to increase transparency. I'd also point out, as previously mentioned, that it relieves board certification from specialists. If the idea is to protect the citizenry of Nevada, that actually lowers the standard. I'd again like to point out that AB 438 is a poor bill that was rushed, and I would voice my opposition to such. Thank you very much.
For your testimony. For our secretary, we could just please make sure to record his testimony in opposition. If we could go back to neutral broadcasting and check the telephone line for anyone wishing to testify in the neutral position.
Yes, Chair. We are currently in neutral. If you would like to testify on neutral for AB 438, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 960, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Dr. David White, D-A-V-I-D-W-H-I-T-E, and my testimony was also the same as Dr. Hunter's in opposition, so I will wait for direction at this point.
Thank you, Dr. White. Let's go back. Let's finish let's finish testimony in neutral broadcasting if we could, and then we can come back. I understand this is a new setting, and people are getting used to the virtual setting and calling in for testimony. So I will go back to those in opposition, but let's complete testimony in neutral first.
Thank you.
Will do. 1 second, Chair.
Thank you, broadcasting. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Okay, so we are currently on neutral. So to testify in neutral, please press *9 now for AB 438. Caller with the last three digits of 585, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. To unmute, a caller with the last three digits of 585, please press *6.
Good evening.
Good evening. When you're ready.
Yes, madam. My name is Dr. Khalid Jilani, last name Jilani. I do apologize. As Dr. White and Dr. Hunter, I'm also calling in opposition. I apologize.
Okay, no worries.
May I continue?
No, we will come back to opposition. At this time, we're taking testimony in neutral. So we're going to take all the testimony in neutral first. Okay, thank you. Broadcasting, can we go to the next caller for neutral?
Chair, there are no more callers in neutral at this time.
Okay, now at this time, let's go back. I understand again that there is technical difficulty, so I do want to make sure that everyone who has been patiently waiting to testify gets the opportunity. So broadcasting, if we could go back to those wishing to testify in opposition.
Yes, sir. Okay, to testify in opposition on AB 438, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 585, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Honorable members of the committee and Honorable Chairperson, good evening. Thank you again. My name is Dr. Khalid Jilani, last name Jilani. I am a Nevada general dentist with license number 6504. I have been practicing dentistry in Nevada since 2015 after graduating from UNLV. I am also a member of the American Dental Association, the Nevada Dental Association, and the Southern Nevada Dental Society. Assembly Bill 438 establishes investigation committees that can be held in secret, prohibiting a dentist from due process. The process is incredibly dangerous if you have a board member with personal vendettas, which has happened in the past. With that being said, I oppose this bill. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Broadcasting, next caller.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 304, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, this is Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Richard Dragon. I have practiced dentistry as a licensed Nevada dentist in Douglas County since 1985. I'm the immediate past president of the Nevada Dental Association, as well as a non-paid lobbyist for the current 81st Nevada Legislative Session. I was also a disciplinary screening officer for the board in 2017 and 2018. Please don't confuse me with the NDA president, who was also on the board. I resigned my position prior to my presidency because I sensed conflict of interest. I am in complete opposition to AB 438. AB 438 would be an excessive overreach of influence and power by the existing board, ignoring intent established by Governor Sisolak when he replaced prior staff and members of the board in 2019. Following an audit in 2019 of the prior existing board, Governor Sisolak stated, quote, "I have never seen an audit this egregious ever in 20 years," unquote. Similar contentious issues and violations are still occurring, the only difference being the names of those on the board and their staff. Overreach, open meeting law violations, and reckless punitive investigations are still occurring, not to mention an inability to develop regulatory language from law passed during the 2019 session. During recent years, peer review conducted by northern and southern components of the Nevada Dental Association has been, by all intent and purpose, eliminated. Peer review reduced the cost through mediation with significant positive outcomes. This bill potentially creates more punitive regulatory control over the public and licensees. Again, it has always been my understanding that the current and previous governors were seeking remedial, not punitive actions when complaints were filed. SB 438 will significantly raise licensing fees, which is the reason I believe that there's a 2/3 majority associated with it at a time when young graduates are facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Nevada needs more access to care, not less. Why would we discourage any out-of-state dentist who would normally have a desire to practice in Nevada? This bill would definitely have such a negative effect. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your testimony. Broadcasting, next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 960, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Madam Chair and committee, my name is Dr. David White, D-A-V-I-D, W-H-I-T-E. I'm currently the chairperson for the American Dental Association Council on Government Affairs and also the chairperson for the Nevada Dental Association Council on Government Affairs. I think to fully, and where I'm going to go ahead and start here is I really do appreciate Mr. Alonso's acknowledgement of the difficulty and the challenges of the boards the last several years and the continued discussion over the audit. The most important thing is to understand that there are two documents that are imperative to understand this particular process. First document was conducted. It is a performance audit in 2016, of which the 14 recommendations were made at that particular juncture. All 14, or all but 3 were accepted, but as Madam Carlton mentioned, that there were 3 that were not accepted at that particular juncture. Then in 2019, there was another audit conducted, and it's important to have both of these documents. And at that point, what they stated was that the Nevada State Board of Dental Examiners can enhance operations by strengthening oversight of the investigation and enforcement activities, consulting with commissions on ethics to avoid conflicts of interest, complying with state contracting requirements, and complying with the Nevada Admission Procedure Act. And I personally rise in opposition to this because I don't feel once you've dissected both those documents that this particular bill accomplishes that goal. In addition, we know that public safety is paramount through this particular process. And when you dissect further into this, you'll realize that unfortunately it is the inexperience of the board that allows them to be very influenced by staff, which led them down this course. But again, safety being the paramount, we would want to go ahead and make sure that our standard of care is very high. So when we're attempting to access care, and I'm a general dentist who operates in both Reno and Elko, and I work with my tribe in Ely, Nevada, that we can continue to keep the standard of care as high as possible to keep patient safety at the paramount and at the safety at the highest standards we possibly can. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. White, Dr. White. Broadcasting, next caller, please.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 846. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, my name is Dr. Adrian Ruiz. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, sir. When you're ready, please proceed.
Hello. Okay.
Yes, we can.
Great. Yes. I'm the past president of the Hello. Yes, I'm the past president of the Las Vegas Dental Association. I'm the one that helped and was responsible for the audits that took place. And I think that a lot of people here today on this phone call have this wrong. The reason for these audits were there was definitely favoritism. These peer review systems were set up to favor certain members that belong to certain groups. I, again, with the Las Vegas Dental Association, and a lot of the problems stem from the Nevada Dental Association. And so these audits were very clear. There was zero discipline for the formal discipline that went against people who were Nevada Dental Association members. So they didn't get any discipline, any serious discipline at all. And this was really, really, the reason for this bill is that we have to, number one, make it anonymous. So at the board members, there's no favoritism. That's what this bill is about. No favoritism because it's anonymous. That's the whole point. The other point is that one of the biggest problems that occurred was that there was the board's attorney in the past who was let go because of all the problems that occurred, is he would basically, and he did this to me and to many other dentists, he would threaten a dentist and say, hey, it's going to be $40,000 if you want to fight this, or sign here. I mean, it was so ridiculous. So it's so important that we put a limit on these investigations because you shouldn't have to pay for the right to have your side of the story. This bill is so important, and committee, please pass this bill. This is going to make a huge difference for anonymous complaints so that the patients can be heard and there's a fair system for everybody.
And sir, this is actually the opposition portion of the bill hearing. I understand technical difficulties. I'll make sure your testimony gets
recorded. I'm in support of the bill. Yeah, I had a hard time connecting.
No, it's okay. I understand that. I understand it's late in the evening and that this is the normal process. So we will take your testimony. We'll put it in support. Broadcasting. Let's go to the next caller in opposition.
Chair, there are no more callers in opposition.
Okay, thank you. So we've taken testimony in support, opposition, and neutral. So at this time, I'd like to call our bill sponsors back for any closing remarks.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Alfredo Alonso again for the record, and I'd like to keep this as short as possible. I think it's very, very important that everybody understand what the bill does. I'd be glad to sit down with anybody that has concerns over what the bill actually does and go through it with them. So I offer that up. Again, this is about flexibility. It's about reform. It's about transparency, and talking to the industry of anyone you regulate is never a good idea beforehand. And so that is why we are here today. I think it's very important also to remember that that last year, or excuse me, between the years of 2016 and 18, we had about 200 complaints a year, and 44% of those were dismissed. Now, I'm just telling you, I think that is a very, very high mark, and it is concerning. It should be concerning to everybody. So again, that's what this is about: protecting the public, and ultimately finding a fair method in which the board can operate. And I think we've done that here with this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alonso and Mr. Steitler, for joining us on this evening session of Commerce and Labor. We appreciate you being here to present the bill. With that, I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 438. Members, the last item on our agenda for this evening is public comment. And while we give those time listening over the internet time to call in, I will just go through our public comment housekeeping. I want to remind members that public comment is a time to call in and talk about matters that fall within the jurisdiction of the Commerce and Labor Committee. It is not a time to comment on bills that we've already heard. We open and close the hearing on bills to establish a record of the testimony on a bill. I would also remind members to be respectful when making comments. We limit public comments to 2 minutes per person. And if you start addressing to your remarks to matters that fall outside of the jurisdiction of this committee, I will ask you to redirect your remarks or terminate them. With that, broadcasting, is there anyone on the line for public comment?
To take your place in public comment, please press star 9 now to join the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Thank you so much, broadcasting. Thank you, committee members. Thank you, Commerce and Labor, entire team who was with here this entire time. With that, our meeting is adjourned. And I just want to remind everyone, our next meeting will be this Friday. When you get the agenda, please remember just to note the start time for the meeting. Thank you, committee members. We're adjourned.